It's the Growing for Market podcast.
One of the biggest lessons we learned was just paying farmers to try new technology that helps them make decisions at the soil surface is really useful. And these technologies are less expensive and less complicated than you might expect. And the decision-making improvements are amazing. So I personally really learned two things from the SARE project, besides I should keep going with my no-till regime. The other two things I really learned was, one, I was putting on way too much water and my gut was wrong. Like my finger test, all of what I thought I was seeing was not right. I was always putting on too much water. And I believe a lot of the other growers in the study found that to be the case, which is super important because we all have very limited water. The other thing I learned was if you're going to live in a dry place without a lot of water, having a clay soil is actually a benefit. So then I stopped kind of hating my soil because a lot of the other growers that I was with on this SARE project have very sandy soil and sounds really challenging.
Hello, and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing vegetables and flowers for local markets like farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, and local wholesaling. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine for 34 years, the magazine for flower and vegetable market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. This episode is brought to you by Tend, the all-in-one AI-powered farm management platform trusted by modern growers. Whether you're growing vegetables, flowers, or fruit, or managing a nursery, greenhouse, or vineyard, you know how much time gets lost in planning, tracking, and staying organized. Tend helps you cut through the busy work so you can focus on growing and selling what matters. With Tend, you can plan your crops, assign and track tasks, manage inventory, and handle your sales and accounting all in one smart, easy-to-use platform. Whether you run a 1-acre farm or manage a large operation, Tend adapts to your scale and style, supporting everything from manual labor to fully mechanized workflows. Try it for free at tend.com. No credit card required. That's TEND.com. Streamline your season and grow with confidence.
Hey, it's Lindsay from Grown By. There are a lot of farm sales platforms out there, but there's only one that's cooperatively owned by farmers. And that's Grown By, your all-in-one solution to simplify farm sales. I'm proud and excited to share two new features now available on top of the tools you already know and love. Number one, our customizable CSA box builder. It allows your customers to simply say what they'd like in their share, and Grown By matches their preferences with your weekly harvest. Number two, our new wholesale-only marketplace. Developed with the Culinary Institute of America, it makes your life easier with a dedicated shop for your wholesale customers. No more texting those chefs, combining retail and wholesale inventories and records, and, drumroll, automatic payments on due dates. No more chasing down late payments. These new features sit alongside our popular online sales and traditional subscription CSA tools, making it easier than ever to manage your farm's business. As you start to get ready for next season, we'd love to hear from you and see if our cooperative can be a partner in growing your farm. Visit us at grownby.com. That's GROWNBY.com.
Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming not one, but two guests to the podcast. We've got Nella Mae Parks from Nella Mae's Farm in Cove, Oregon, and Maud Powell, who operated Wolf Gulch Farm in Jacksonville, Oregon for many years, and is also a small farms professor of practice at Oregon State University. They're here today to tell us about a SARE research project and group they are forming to help growers in arid environments. Nella Mae has written a number of articles for Growing for Market magazine over the years, including how to have a thriving farm stand, how to grow in clay, dealing with bindweed, the paper pot transplanter, water conservation strategies, and a number of other articles that subscribers can see in the Growing for Market article archives. Nella Mae has been on the podcast before. A couple years ago, she did an interview talking about how she learned to grow in clay after moving to her current farm that is pretty much the opposite from the deep soil on the farm where she grew up only about a dozen miles away from where she is now. Maud has also been on the podcast before, doing an interview about a year ago about how she had to leave her farm because it was just getting too dry for agriculture, despite having decades of investment in the farm, which is one of the unfortunate realities of our changing weather, that some places are just not going to be suitable for agriculture anymore as the climate changes around us. In response to this, Maud founded the Oregon State University Extension Ag Climate, Grief, and Support Initiative to help farmers cope with the emotional toll of climate change. So maybe that would be a good place to pick up. Maud, can you tell us a bit about your farm, why you had to leave it, and what you're doing now in your work with Oregon State University?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on the podcast. So we started farming in 1998 in the Applegate Valley. We bought 180 acres that had been an old cattle ranch, but no longer had access to the large irrigation ditch. So we were relying on an intermittent creek and then rain catchment during the winter months. And at first it seemed like plenty of water. We went right in and started a CSA, and we were going to the growers markets. And then pretty quickly we went into a drought cycle in 2001, at which time we kind of reassessed. We lined our ponds. We started using exclusively drip tape. And then we did everything we can to just kind of make the farm as water resilient as possible. And that worked for a couple of decades. So we were part of the Siskiyou Sustainable Cooperative, which was a marketing cooperative of 8 organic farms, feeding about 300 families a week. And then we got really interested in seed production. So we certified organic, and then we started growing on contract with seed companies like Fedco, High Mowing, Johnny's, Uprising, to name a few. Yeah. And then as the climate got hotter and drier, we realized our farm was better suited to seed production. So we kind of gradually, every year, we were growing more seed than produce, until about 2015, when we just switched exclusively over to seed production because we were able to cut off irrigation, depending on the crop, usually by mid to late August. So it really kind of resolved a lot of sort of the water stress that we were facing at the end of the growing season. But then in 2017, our creek dried up. That was a scary moment. So we, like you said, I've been working at the extension since 2005. So I was really I had access to all of the latest technologies and practices and strategies for adapting to drought conditions and being water resilient. So we were really immediately practicing everything that was coming out from the university. And then in 2021, we had that heat dome where, in Southern Oregon, the temperatures were it was started in June, which was alarming in and of itself. But we were, the high temperatures were in the hundreds for weeks at a time. It was really at that point where we started, our ponds were just dropping precipitously. We were pumping water at night between the ponds. We kind of got into triage mode where we just kind of were like, which are the crops that are most economically important to us, and let some of the other ones go. We ended up buying water from Medford and trucking it, which is our closest town, and trucking it up to the farm. And it was at that point we really realized it was just untenable to stay on that property and farm. It was a really difficult period for us. It was such a gut punch for us personally, having been there for 23 years and invested everything, raised our kids, all of it, building the soil. My husband called our topsoil, he called it his third child. And, we kind of picked out the places we wanted to be buried on the farm. Like, it was home. It was everything we had. And so it was really hard personally. And then just existentially, like, oh, wow, this is climate change is here. This is not something in the future. We grappled with kind of our next move for a while. We were really fortunate. We have deep ties in our community. So people had offered us leases on properties with more water, which we started farming in 2022, the next year. that our friends just let us grow on for trade. And they had plenty of water and great topsoil. We actually were like, oh, farming is actually not as hard as we made it for ourselves. So that was an interesting moment. But yeah, we took our time. We considered leaving the area to a cooler, wetter climate because, of course, not only do we face high temperatures and drought, but we have severe wildfire smoke a lot often. The past 2 summers have been way better for whatever reasons. But so we considered leaving the area, but had just such deep ties with our community that we ultimately decided to stay in the Applegate. But we did move to a property that's a lot smaller, which is nice, and then has much more reliable water. So we are still farming. We're continuing to grow about 4 to 5 acres of vegetable and flower seed crops. And we're really happy. We're happy to be here. We're happy to be farming and really grateful. We've had so much help and support. Yeah. And then that, as I mentioned, or you mentioned, that led me to this work in climate stress and grief, because I saw for myself how incredibly stressful that period was for us, and really how it became difficult to think, to make decisions. We were fighting, our thoughts were muddled. It was so you could really see like how the changes in the climate are impacting mental health and behavioral health. And so I got really interested in that topic and actually found that there had been virtually no work done in that realm for farmers, for producers, which I find shocking because farmers are on the front line. We're facing climate change economically, physically, we're out there, in it. And there's so much work being done in that space for the general public, especially for kids, actually, and young people, which makes sense. But so it's been really exciting work. It's been really well received. And yeah, I just got back from New England, where I took the show on the road and did a bunch of workshops out there for farmers and agricultural service providers. And it's been really important work. So that's been a silver lining of losing our farm.
Yeah. I'm glad you're doing it, because obviously it's a reality that people are going to be confronting more in the future. It's hard for people to think about their farms that they've invested in, like you have, not being productive anymore. But think about a lot of the world's great agricultural areas, like the Central Valley of California. Part of the reason that they're great agricultural areas is because of the climate. And so it does make me think about what it's going to be like. It's unpredictable. It's hard to say, what these areas that have become so established as important agricultural areas, they may just not be able to function like that in the future. And so I think you're ahead of the curve. I am kind of surprised there hasn't been more about it, but I'm glad you're doing that, because obviously it's something that farmers are going to be grappling with more in the future. Oh, quick note. We just had Chris Jagger from Blue Fox Farm on a few weeks ago, which I bring up because he is also in the Applegate Valley, if I'm not mistaken. And I just wanted to mention, if people want to tune into that interview, they were talking about what a dry and unusual climate the Applegate Valley is there in Oregon. He was talking about how close the Applegate Valley is to the border with California. And so people always think that they're going to have earlier tomatoes and heat-loving crops than the rest of Oregon. And he was talking about how theirs are actually later, just because with your high desert climate, it gets so cold at night that the heat units don't accumulate and things are actually later. So I'll just stop there, because I think we're going to talk more about the climate there. But if people are interested in that interview, they can go back and find it. Okay, Nella Mae, can you tell us a bit about your farm?
Yes. So my farm, this is my 13th season farming, but I actually grew up on a pretty self-sustainable farm on 22 acres that was maybe just ahead of its time. My parents and I raised all kinds of livestock, but for selling for quarters and halves. And we raised most of our own feed. We had a huge garden, and an orchard. So I started going to the farmers market in La Grande, Oregon, down the road when I was about 10. and I was in 4-H. And so I really loved it. And I never had a job off of our farm because my parents were like, we can't afford that. We need you here. We need you. My dad would get up, rake hay at 5, and then he had a contracting business, and he would go work. And then I would do the second rake. And then my mom would come home and we'd take care of all the animals. We had a bed and breakfast. We just did all of these things that are now sort of trendy to try and make it all work. But my parents both had off-farm jobs, and I never did because I had to be there to help out with all the animals and all of our chores. But I had left to go to college, and I studied water resources, and my parents just begged me not to study agriculture and to not be a farmer because it was just so hard. But by the time I got a degree and was being a 20-something, I actually ended up in the Walla Walla Valley working with farmers on water resources and salmon issues. And I just met a lot of farmers my age or a little older who were making a go of it in the Walla Walla Valley in Washington. And by that time, things had really shifted and the local food movement was just really kicking off. And I really loved working with growers. I worked with them particularly on groundwater issues of quantity and quality as it related to salmon and drinking water. And so I really wanted to stay with that. And I had an opportunity to come back to my valley, my county, and work with farmers on local food and other sustainability issues around energy and farm to school and a lot of other things like that, as well as, some work at the legislature on cottage food bills and chicken processing and all these things that we were able to get passed in the around 2010 in Oregon. But I really wanted to farm, and I have 2 sets of just really amazing mentors that just said, you just need to do it. You just need to close the door, open the window. And I was able to come back to, well, I want to say it's my family's place, but like Maud, the place I grew up on, we lost our water. Our ditch went dry. Our well went dry. We ended up selling that place when I was in a junior in high school and moving to another farm that had water. It has 2 ditches on it and has water rights and a great well. And so I came back to this place in Cove 13 seasons ago and started farming here. And I have a very community-based farm. We grow primarily salad mix, tomatoes. It's a market farm. And it was a big learning curve because, as you mentioned, I went from a farm where I grew up on where it was 200 feet of topsoil and then water to a pile of clay. Or I could have chosen another spot down the road, which was just a pile of rocks. That's where I live. Those are the 2 options you have. And just learning to farm on clay has been very challenging. But like I said, this is the 13th season. I employ a lot of youth from my local community here. We have a farm stand at the end of our road. It's the only grocery store in our town of 500 people. I work with Rogue Farm Corps and I host apprentices. I know you've had Rogue on the podcast as well. I just turned 40, so I feel like my role has been changing from kind of the beginner and the mentee to the mentor. And that has been super satisfying and a whole nother learning adventure. And then let's see, I think 2023, Maud and I and 3 other farms worked with Katie Swanson from Sweet Union Farm in Klamath Falls on the first SARE research project that I participated in. And I've just kind of gotten the bug to do more research. That's my background, is water science. And I convinced Katie to jump onto this new SARE project with us, and she convinced Maud, and here we are.
Yeah. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. A well-built high tunnel is one of the smartest investments a small farm can make. It protects your crops, extends your season, and keeps income rolling in even through winter. Nifty Hoops builds complete Gothic high tunnels that are easy to install and built to last. Their easy, bolt together construction makes setup straightforward and efficient, whether it's a small backyard hoop house or a dozen large production scale high tunnels. Especially through their community build option, where professional builders work alongside your crew, family, or neighbors to build each structure, usually in a single day. Most growers go with Nifty's full setup: steel framed end walls, roll up sides, baseboards, double plastic with inflation, automated vents, and real doors, all priced to make the best choice the easy one. Nifty is a small crew out of Michigan using U.S. steel and working hands on with growers across the country. They'll help evaluate your site, handle NRCS paperwork, and if they're building with you, they'll even float your cost share until after the build. Visit niftyhoops.com to learn more. Farm more seasons. Grow more food. Nifty Hoops. Renewal season is here, and the work you put in now is what brings members back next year. Melanie from Shake Fork Community Farm, who you may remember as a guest on this podcast, brought in $40,000 in renewals in just 2 weeks. Now she's sharing her exact strategy in a free live workshop and downloadable playbook from Farmhand. Get the playbook and watch on demand at farmhand.partners/GFM. That's farmhand.partners/GFM. And now back to the show. Your first SARE project is what you did write an article for Growing for Market about. So would you just say quickly what that SARE project was about? And then if people are interested for all the details, they can go read your article?
Yeah. So there are 5 farms that spanned from Northeast Oregon to Klamath Falls, which is Southwest Oregon, and a lot of farms around Bend, which is the middle of the state. We're all high desert, short season farms, and we were looking at the difference in water retention and the need for irrigation under different tillage regimes. So no-till, broad fork, high till, and we just found that, as expected, the lower tillage regimes held more water. We determined that by using tensiometers. But I think, Maud, you jump in, but I think one of the biggest lessons we learned was just paying farmers to try new technology that helps them make decisions at the soil surface is really useful. And these technologies are less expensive and less complicated than you might expect. And the decision-making improvements are amazing. So I personally really learned 2 things from the SARE project, besides I should keep going with my no-till regime. The other 2 things I really learned was, 1, I was putting on way too much water and my gut was wrong. Like my finger test, all of what I thought I was seeing was not right. I was always putting on too much water, and I believe a lot of the other growers in the study found that to be the case, which is super important because we all have very limited water. The other thing I learned was, if you're going to live in a dry place without a lot of water, having a clay soil is actually a benefit. So then I stopped kind of hating my soil because a lot of the other growers that I was with on this SARE project have very sandy soil, and sounds really challenging. And I guess the last piece that was really surprising to me was, I had sort of thought of Klamath Falls, where Katie Swanson and Sweet Union Farm is kind of the face of the moon, like dry, windy, hot. And then we all had weather stations. And when we compared all the different farms, my farm that is in like a very green valley was so much more extreme in terms of temperature, and just the climate was so much more extreme than these other places. And it kind of gave me a little more patience for myself, for like, oh, actually what I do is very, very difficult in a very difficult situation. So those were all really helpful. But just, yeah, the encouragement and the experience of just using monitoring is kind of going back to my old job of monitoring water. It was really nice to circle back on that and use that information to make better decisions. And also, I feel like a lot of times people who are doing no-till or low-till, which is what I would say I do, it's kind of, you're like, is this worth it? There's like sometimes so much more work that has to happen because I don't take my BCS into the field. But then when I see the results through these studies that we're doing on farm, it just gives me a little more gumption and verification that it's really worth it. So those are some of my takeaways. Maud?
Yeah, I think that you covered a lot of them. And that's what we heard from other growers in terms of, they were using more water than they actually needed. And as an extension educator, as Nella kind of referred to at the beginning, it was really interesting to see how, because we're really in the business of like behavior change and being able to document that we see these outcomes when we do these educational pieces. And so it was fascinating to give people this equipment. We gave all the 5 growers a weather station and then also this tensiometer. And it was really hard to get people to just open the box and figure out how to use them because it was spring and people are farming and planting and they're running around. And then to introduce a new technology was just too difficult. But we had paid these growers. I mean, it was free equipment. They all got this equipment for free as part of participating. We were paying them to do the study. And then, so they kind of had a carrot and a stick. The stick was that like we had a deadline where we wanted people to, document their recordings. And even so, it was really challenging. And then once they did adopt the equipment, they learned a lot. They changed their watering schedules. And so, you could see that there was impact, but really that barrier was that people are really busy and adding a new technology, even though it was fairly simple, was a challenge. So as an educator, I'm really interested in that piece. So how do we, is it trainings? Is it literally like going to people's houses and pulling the tensiometer out of the box and showing them how to use it? And then, is it having a cohort where there's support from other growers and how, if people have issues coming up? So I found that to be really fascinating because there's so much great technology. Now there's all this AI technology, however you feel about AI, but it's like, how do we actually support producers in adopting new technologies when everyone is already, so busy?
Yeah.
It's hard to know as a grower what technologies are actually useful and worth your time and money. And tensiometers are not expensive and they're not complicated to use. Whereas I feel like I'm constantly getting barraged with like, buy this new expensive this or that. I mean, the new thing is, buy a invisible fence for your cattle. And it's like, I just get frustrated with not having the information I need to know whether it's really worth my time and effort and money. And also, like, there's only so much data you can utilize that's useful for decision making. And so I think the other thing that was so helpful about our SARE project was that we had Maud and we had some other folks from OSU who were matching the tensiometer and the weather data together and then showing us the results. And I think that was the biggest thing for me of like, oh, this really got me information that was useful. So it's worth continuing on. And the E part of SARE is education. And so we've all done a lot to go on podcasts, write articles and share our results with other growers. And I think sometimes that can also help people get over the hump of like, is this actually worth it? But I think for anyone in a low water situation, not using a tensiometer to really check your gut is probably, I mean, maybe your gut's better than mine, but if you have a gut like mine, then you need a tensiometer to check your assumptions. And you can't monitor something you don't measure. And if you are able to make sure that your assumptions are within the realm of reality, then I think you can do more conservation and you can grow better plants.
Right. And just make sure that you're making the most of a very limited resource, in your case, and a lot of people's case being water. Okay. And so just in case people aren't familiar, a tensiometer is how you measure the amount of water in the soil. Is that right?
Well, yeah, it's soil available water. So it's how much energy would it take the plant to rip the water off of the soil particle. And the closer you are to zero, the easier, the less energy it would take. It's measured in kilopascals, I believe. And the higher the number, basically the drier the soil is, the harder the plant would have to get the water.
Yeah. Okay. So, that's interesting. I've never heard that explanation before, but that's good to know, right? Because people may not even know that there's an instrument that they can get to measure their soil moisture. And so is that it's got to be a wireless thing, right? You have a sensor out there in the soil and it's transmitting a signal letting you know how dry it is?
If you pay for the expensive kind, but I've looked into the expensive kind, and I don't think that at this point we have a great solution for wireless technology at our scale. Like if have thousands of acres, yes, you can have a really fancy, nice tensiometer. These are actually just, they look like little, I don't know, big fat Tootsie Rolls, I guess, that you stick in the water, in the soil at different depths. And then you actually have to physically go in and hook up a machine, a little tiny pocket sized machine that then you press a button and it says what the reading is at each depth.
Okay, cool. If people didn't know they exist, now they do.
Yeah.
All right, Maud, can you tell us a bit about the SARE program as far as the history and how it works?
Yeah. And just for clarification, I think the E tends to be silent. So I've always heard it pronounced SARE. I don't think it matters, but that's the way I've heard it pronounced.
I wasn't sure.
No worries. No. So Western SARE, which this grant is under, covers 13 of the Western states and a handful of the Pacific Islands. And SARE is part of the National SARE, which has Northeast, Central, and Southern SARE plus Western SARE. It was started in 1988, and it's been a real driver in sustainable agriculture. So it was actually started as part of a national push by the USDA to support farming practices that are not only profitable, but they're also good for both the environment and rural communities. So SARE considers these three components of sustainability to be environmental, economic, and social. So there's those three parts. And depending on the project, some projects focus more on one or the other two, but really all of the projects that SARE funds tends to at least touch on all of those three aspects of sustainability. And what's really cool about SARE is that it's producer driven. So it's the farmers and ranchers that come up with the research questions. They help shape the type of research that's being done. It's usually applied on farm, so it feels more relevant. Because some of the criticisms that we get from producers I work with who see these research studies and they're like, yeah, but that was done in perfect soil and water conditions with all of the labor that someone would need and all the funding for infrastructure, because it's on a research farm at a land grant university. And so it feels less relevant. So SARE is really all about making it applied for farmers. And the farmers and ranchers lead the project. So if you go and apply for funding, you can see that, it's mandatory to have producer involvement in every step of the process. And this current grant that Nella Mae is working under is a farmer rancher grant. So I'm serving as the technical advisor, but I have a fairly tangential role. I'm just kind of here to support where Nella Mae needs it. I can be somewhat of a liaison with the university, but really it's Nella Mae and the other farmers who are driving the project. And the projects tend to they'll fund anything from soil health studies to creating innovative marketing models to learning about different types of grazing techniques. And Western SARE, each of the four regional SAREs are hosted by a different university. So Western SARE is hosted by Montana State University. And really, over the years, SARE has become this go-to resource for practical science-based solutions in agriculture. So if you go to the websites, they're just packed with different resources and case studies and all kinds of great information that are really quite accessible. They're really they're written for an audience to make it, easy to understand and read. And, it's all research based, but it's translated into really practical steps to use the information.
Okay.
And I would just say, as a grower, the two places that I go to if I think, I wonder if this is going on with this plant, or if there's any research that's been done on this, or am I the only one who's ever thought of this? The first place I go is Growing for Market Archive. So there's your plug. And the second place I go to is the SARE archive, because the farmer rancher in field, on farm studies, are super practical. And you can type in lettuce in hot climates or summer lettuce or something like that, and stuff will just pop up and you can sort through things and get new ideas about whether you should really invest in one thing or another. For example, I popped up a bunch of research on the SARE website, the SARE archives, about whether shade cloth has any effect on lettuce production in the summer. And the truth is, it doesn't. There's just not a lot of evidence that it can create enough of a climate, knitted shade cloth can create enough of a climate difference to really prevent bolting and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't buy it.
Yeah, the SARE program really is great because the programs are initiated by farmers, right? So I feel like it's like you got a farmer out there dealing with some challenge on their farm, right? And they think like, well, I wonder if, option A or option B, I wonder if the shade cloth or sprinklers or whatever is the best thing. And then SARE, gives them the funds to make it happen, whereas otherwise a farmer probably wouldn't have the time or money to go out and do that kind of research. So it is a great program. And I'm glad we were able to talk about it that way. If people haven't heard of it, they know. In fact, most years we get at least a couple pitches here at Growing for Market for articles based on SARE grants, because, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think one of the stipulations of the grant is that you have some way of disseminating your findings, right? And so we'll get these pitches from people saying, I'm working on a SARE grant. We were hoping that an article in Growing for Market might be part of our dissemination strategy. Would you be interested in an article on X, Y, or Z? So I think most years probably we have at least one article that is basically the write-up of what people learned in a SARE grant. I mean, just off the top of my head, one of the most recent ones was a grower did a research project on a farm in upstate New York where they had a lot of fall brassica disease pressure. And so they did all these different treatments, row cover versus netting and all these different treatments to see what worked best. And so, I think it showed some of the things really didn't work very well. And so it's great. It's like, don't waste your time and money on those things. It was a great article. So if people want to find that one, it's in the archives talking about specifically about fall brassica diseases. And so we've had a number of other articles that are based on SARE grants over the years. It's a fantastic program.
The grants could be $2,000 or $30,000. There's people who ask for very little money just to try some new technology that they can't afford. And you don't have to be on a huge farm. We have a half an acre of vegetables. I think a Sweet Union has 3/4 or an acre. So it's one of the few things that I've found over the years that's like scaled that's coming from the federal government in agriculture. Usually the scale is enormous corporate export agriculture. The rest of you don't count. And so this program is just really special that way. But also those guys could apply for a SARE grant and do something interesting too. So,
right.
Yeah. And just to clarify, because you kind of brought it up, Andrew, so the name again, Sustainable Ag Research and Education. So every project has to have a strong research component, but also a strong extension, or as you use the word, dissemination. So that's a key part of it, is how are you going to get this information out? And actually several years ago, SARE actually released a new grant, which is called Research to Grassroots, I believe, with the idea that there's actually so much research that's already out there, but we actually need to get it out into communities. So that's that grassroots piece. So in that grant, you actually, I don't think, do any new research. You just literally take research that you believe would be relevant to your local or regional community of farmers, and you figure out a way to deliver it so that information gets out there.
Okay. And I know a lot of federal ag funding has been cut or paused, or who even knows what's going on with it. Has SARE funding been cut or threatened as a lot of the other ag grants have been?
The funding has not been cut, but we did face some challenges this year. I say we because I'm the Oregon state representative for the Professional Development Fund. So I consider myself part of SARE. But although the money was not cut outright, but there was a significant delay in disbursement. So the funds are usually released in March, and they didn't become available until late September. So that left those host institutions I mentioned, so for us, Montana State, scrambling to get the support before the end of the fiscal year. So that delay sparked concern among farmers and researchers, and eventually members of Congress who really rallied to defend the program. So ultimately, the funds were released, but actually just yesterday, the RFPs, so the request for proposals, were released. So it's just coming out, like probably 6 months delayed at this point.
Okay.
And I would say our members of Congress rallied because farmers rallied. So
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition did a lot of work to get the word out to folks like us that SARE funding could be lost for this next year if it didn't get dispersed by the end of the fiscal year. And a lot of farmers called their reps and senators to push for that. So
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad it wasn't completely cut off because it's a great program. I mean, as far as not a lot of money, making a lot of results and information that can be useful to a lot of farmers, it seems like it has a very high return to investment ratio for a program. So I'm glad it's still rolling at this point. Okay, so speaking of SARE, can you tell us about your new SARE research project? Like, what are the goals, outcomes, and are you in the research phase of it enough to have learned anything at this point?
our research will begin next season. So the question we have is how to grow better and more lettuce in the hardest part of the year, which is July and August for our high desert extreme climate conditions. And there are two farms, as I've mentioned in this study, mine, Nella Mae's farm in Cove, Oregon, and Sweet Union Farm in Klamath Falls, Oregon, which is run by Katie Swanson, who initiated the first SARE project I was involved in. And she and I really struggle with some, well, for us, what are kind of typical extreme conditions when it comes to lettuce. It becomes really difficult, I'm sure, everywhere in all kinds of climates in the summer to provide like regular and an uninterrupted source of salad mix at market and to my wholesale customers. And of course, that's when they want it. Well, they want it all the time, but they also want tomatoes in May. So, but what I've noticed just anecdotally over time is that I use a lot of row cover to keep aphids out and butterflies on my brassicas, but occasionally I'd have, a row that ended up with a little bit of lettuce with the brassicas or a little bit of chard with the brassicas. And I just started noticing that the greens that were under cover were just doing so much better in July and August than the greens that were not under cover. And I've done a lot of traveling in Central and South America, and I thought a lot about how, well, it gets really hot in those places, but it's more tropical. So maybe humidity is actually something that we want to look at for increasing our production. And I did a bunch of casting about for research studies about this and how it specifically could be a benefit where I live, because foliar disease, except in maybe a few weeks in May, is not an issue where we live. It's like you walk outside in August and it's negative humidity. Like it physically rips water out of your body. So I have a good friend who used to live here in Eastern Oregon who lives in Ohio now, and she's just constantly fighting foliar disease. And I was like, I can't relate. It's just not something that we have here. So I think because I feel like most of the books and a lot of the research that's done is in non-arid or non-semi-arid climates, that I've sort of taken on this idea that like humidity is the enemy. But I just started thinking maybe it's not for me for 2 months of the year. And so what we're going to look at is how row cover and shade cloth affect humidity for lettuce during these hard times of the year that we have to grow them. So in August and July. And we want to see, well, do we have better production if the humidity is higher, and at what level? So is there a point at which the humidity is harmful and we start getting foliar disease? And the way we're controlling for humidity is using row cover, but also overhead sprinkling, which isn't something that we typically do for a lot of reasons. The low amount of water we have is one of them. Also, just trying to avoid weeds. Overhead water always creates more weed pressure, but also because like not where I live, but where my partner farm is in Klamath Falls, it's just a wind tunnel. So overhead watering can be really difficult. So we are going to have plots that have row cover with drip, row cover with overhead water, and shade cloth with drip and shade cloth with overhead water. And then the control is nothing. So they'll be covered and uncovered beds. And we're using Orisha temperature and humidity sensors in each of our plots to measure over the study time, the study period, what's the effect of overhead water and what's the effect of these different kinds of row cover on temperature and humidity. And then we're going to be comparing our yield per bed using this Salanova in paper pots at 6-inch spacing. And we're just going to see, like, can we increase our plant health, our yield, regrowth, that sort of thing by increasing humidity in this extremely arid climate.
Yeah, that's very valuable. I'm glad you're doing that, because if you think about it, just by the nature of local agriculture, most local growers are not growing their crops in the like ideal place to grow them, right? Just by definition, if you're spread across the country, let's say like the Salinas Valley of California, is probably like lettuce heaven, right? So all the like big, huge commercial producers of lettuce go there, but people, that's kind of like the task of the local farmers, to figure out how to grow these crops in what is not the ideal environment for most of them. So that's really interesting, your methodology. I know that I've been following on social media, Ben Hartman has been doing some experiments with using burlap sort of in place of shade cloth. And I guess this is where you would want to go back and look at this, but I think he said that he was running micro irrigations like with a sprinkler to almost like wet that burlap down and then let it evaporate over the course of the day to just make, I guess, cool things off a little bit and then create a more humid environment. So I don't know if there's any inspiration there, but that sounds like a really good project.
Yeah, well, I also am curious about the overhead water because I remember doing one of the Johnny's Seeds webinars where they were talking about summer lettuce, and there was a grower in the South saying like, well, we use overhead water to cool things down. And that just isn't my system. And like to invest in that on a big scale is a lot. So this is another way for me to look and see, okay, is it worth my time and money to change up my irrigation? I'd have to put in a bigger header because I'd need new pressure, more pressure. And is it worth it? And this project is going to be for an opportunity for me to test it on a smaller scale before I invest in a whole bunch of stuff. And I don't know. I mean, there could be a combination, for my particular climate, maybe overhead water and underneath my row cover is going to be great, but I could imagine that being a nightmare for somebody in a different climate. But that's the thing is Katie and I and Maud are dedicated to doing research in these really dry, arid, extreme climates because it's just not being done. And it just doesn't exist. And there's literally no book I can read that I could read 10 books about how to grow things in Maine, right? I could read quite a few books about how to grow things on the wet side of Oregon, but I don't live on the wet side of Oregon. And so I just keep running up against this barrier of there's just not a lot of resources from OSU, Oregon State University, to support dry side growers. And there's also just not a lot of books or research out there. And so we're trying to add to that body of knowledge and figure it out for ourselves. And as Katie always says, we're living everyone else's future, right? So we are already dealing with these extreme temperatures and crazy wildfire smoke and just heat domes, all this stuff, which are difficult for growers in the Willamette Valley of Oregon where it's wet, but they are 10 times more difficult for us because we also just don't have access to water, which is a main way of dealing with some of these issues. And as Maud mentioned earlier, the heat dome of 2021, like that was a complete game changer for a lot of growers in the Pacific Northwest because it was apocalyptic and it was the absolute worst year I had ever production wise, but also just we had so much smoke and it was just so hot for so long so early that I had to really worry about my crew. And these are things that we're trying to figure out how to use simple technology to improve growing conditions in this extreme environment so that we can take it easier on our crew and ourselves, but also keep going, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're doing that research because as we know, there are very few solutions in agriculture that are one size fits all. And that's definitely one of the challenges of, say, like running the magazine and the podcast is realizing that We have diverse audiences. Some people are mostly growing veg, some people are mostly growing flowers, some people are in humid environments, some people are in very dry environments. So we try to have a variety of content, realizing that not every article, not every podcast is going to relate to everybody, but we do have a very diverse environment here in North America. And so somebody's got to generate that information in the first place to be able to share it. So I'm glad you're doing that.
And I think you always do a great job of having just like something for everybody in every issue.
Oh, good. Yeah. That's we definitely try. I mean, that's something we think about is that honestly, not every single story in every magazine is going to apply to every grower, but try to have enough of a mix of things. It's our hope that most growers can have at least one or two stories, let's say, in any given magazine that are going to be relevant to them. And so, the way we look at it is if one or two stories can save you some money, make you more efficient, or give you a new variety or a new best practice or something like that, it's probably more than made it worth the cost of the subscription. So we think about, we live in a huge continent when you consider, most of our readers are in North America or in Canada or the United States. We know there's a lot of different climates there. So we do try to remember that. Is there anything that, are there any other challenges that you want to talk about with your climate? Because I do know that people probably hear Oregon and they think about the rainy side, which is the western part of Oregon, right? Whereas there's the whole, the eastern part that's very, very dry.
Yeah, 2/3 of the state is not rainy. So it's more like Idaho or Wyoming or Nevada than it is like Portland. So, okay, where to begin? And Maud did mention wildfire smoke. That is not something we can really control for, but it is something that a lot of folks in the US probably are unfamiliar with, like the effects of, besides the effect on our labor force and us. Sometimes it can be so thick that it actually slows ripening. And there have been years that I've had to take my shade cloth off my tomato houses early because I'm like, well, I'm not getting any sun. These things are green.
It can cool the weather a tiny bit, which can be
is nice,
but you can't breathe. So
you can't breathe, and your tomatoes aren't ripening. Yeah. So that's something that it's really hard, as Katie says, as she just says, like, try wearing an N95 mask when it's 90 degrees out and you're doing physical labor. Like, it's really tough. So along with that, like, we experience a lot of drought, and where I live in the northeast part of the state, I have experienced less of extreme drought than, say, Katie has in Klamath Falls. But water is not a guarantee. Even when there is water, you have to consider water quality. So the lower the water gets, the more filtering you have to do, which is another expense. If you're using surface water, filtration just costs a lot of time and money. And with dry out conditions, you get toxic algae, the water is warmer, shallower. All of these things create, trouble down the line. So I try and paint a picture for people of what I mean by I live in an extreme climate. We have 50-degree temperature swings every single day.
Wow.
So it could be 40 degrees in the morning, and then it could be 90 or 100 in the day. And so plants do not love that. Turns out most of them don't like it one bit. And what that means is Katie and I always joke about how, like, oh, I'm closing my hoop houses at night, but I also have shade cloth on because I'm closing for frost protection at certain parts of the year. In our, what we call spring, is when you have to do frost and heat protection. That's spring, and it lasts like 30 seconds. I mean, we go straight from basically winter to summer with this really short period of spring, and it's really a critical time because it's really easy to lose plants to cold or to heat. And I don't think it's something that a lot of other climates deal with, or a lot of, folks that are not in like the high desert deal with. We're both, Katie and I think we're in hardiness zone 6B. So it's not the North Pole, but it can literally freeze any day of the year. So We had rain twice in July this year, and I was like, I don't know if this has happened in my whole life. And I asked one of my mentors over at the nursery, I said, can you remember this? And he goes, no, but I think before you were born, it snowed in July. So this is the kind of extreme heat that I'm talking about. And it's, as they say, it's a dry heat, but it doesn't make it easier to work in.
And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Today's episode of the Growing for Market podcast is brought to you by BCS America. On our farm, we've had our BCS two-wheel tractor for over a decade, and with no belts to slip, its all-gear-driven construction is still going strong. Though we originally got it for rototilling, we kept it even when we went mostly no-till because it can do so many other things around the farm. From snow blowing, to making raised beds with the rotary plow, to chipping wood, it can do just about anything you might need on a farm with the right attachment. Need to shred a cover crop? A BCS flail mower will make quick work of even the most vigorous cover crop and chop it up so it breaks down quickly. Want to stir in compost or amendments without inverting soil layers? A power harrow turns your BCS into a precise tilthing machine with depth control so you don't mix deeper than you want to. With so many attachments to choose from, it truly is the Swiss Army knife of farm implements. It's why, instead of saying two-wheel tractor, so many people just say BCS. Tractors and attachments are on sale through the end of the year. Visit bcsamerica.com to find sale pricing and your nearest dealer. If you have never attended an ASCFG conference, there is no better time to invest in yourself. The Association of Specialty Cut Flowers is welcoming Growing for Market readers to register at the ASCFG member rate for the 2026 conference in Albuquerque on January 13th and 14th. You'll meet well-known podcasters Charlotte Smith of the Profitable Mindset podcast and Scott Shepard of the Flower podcast. These dynamic speakers, along with Dr. John Dole, Laura Langenick, and Robert Washington Vaughns, fill out the first day of sessions. Day one will be topped off with a trade show and social time where you can meet industry suppliers and mingle with new friends over appetizers and drinks. There will be something for everyone with concurrent sessions on day two. Choose which sessions you'll attend and team up with a friend to swap notes from one another. When asked what the best part of being at an ASCFG conference is, Dave Dowling said, "The conversations with other growers during the breaks. Taking in all the info you weren't expecting to learn. Rebecca Kutzer Rice of Moonshot Farm shares, every time I attend an ASCFG conference, my farm leaps ahead and I make lifelong friends. Can't wait to meet you in Albuquerque." Visit ascfg.org for conference information. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that folks starting at Oregon State University, and now it's actually a separate nonprofit, but there's this great organization called the Dry Farming Collaborative, and they've done a lot of work in using no water to grow crops like tomatoes and melons, and then sometimes like some early irrigation to get the plant started. And it's just interesting. It does really well in the western part of the state. And it's funny because where I live, the Applegate Valley is considered west, but we're much more like Nella Mae and Katie's climate with the big temperature swings. We're not quite as high. We're in the kind of 2,000 to 3,000 foot elevation range, but still have those big swings. And we don't have any of that kind of maritime influence because of the coastal and the coastal range and the Siskiyou range. Anyway, so point being, often like it's pitched to us like, oh, this dry farming would work great in your regions. But the problem is that we can't get our plants in the ground till much later than, say, in the Willamette Valley, because our last frost is so much later than theirs. So while they can get crops in the ground often in April and take advantage of that spring rain, we're not typically able to get anything in till Memorial Day. And we've had frosts here in June, and I'm sure Nella Mae can speak to that. So we can't get our crops in early enough to take advantage of that spring rain, and then we get into the drought season. So I just wanted to mention that because it's often what people will say to me is, well, why can't you just dry farm? And I'm like, well, it's different. The soils are different, but also it's really about that frost date and when you can plant things out.
Yeah, Katie says dry farming is for people who get rain, which we don't. So, I think I looked at my weather station that we got from the last SARE grant yesterday. We have had 11 inches so far this year.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that is an extreme climate. And so those extreme day-night temperature fluctuations are partially a function of it being so dry, right? Because a lot of people know how moisture, whether that be cloud cover or maybe even just moisture in the atmosphere, tends to keep heat closer to the earth. That's why, the coldest nights are cloudless nights, because the heat is going right off into the atmosphere. So it sounds like that's what you have most days of the year. Is you might have all that heat during the day, but then it goes back up into the atmosphere and you get those really big temperature swings. Is that accurate?
Clear nights, yep. And also, just people are probably like, well, if it's so dry and you only get 11 inches of rain, I mean, we'll get some more here in the fall, but where does your water come from? Well, we are really reliant on snowmelt. So basically, all of our water, Katie and I, we're all surrounded by these very high peaks that basically our reservoir is snowpack. And so if we get a lot of snow in the winter, the ideal situation is it trickles off all summer and we have enough. If we have a temperature flip or a rain on snow event, it can just completely evaporate our snowpack, and then we're just kind of SOL for the summer. And we have to either supplement with groundwater, which is tricky in a lot of places. I mean, like the Midwest is famous for having these, over allocated groundwater basins, but we have a moratorium on agricultural wells in my valley, and we're competing with people with a lot bigger straws. So it just becomes this tricky deal where learning your varieties is really important, but also we need to figure out if some of these other simple technologies, such as row cover, could just help us, no-till or low-till and then row cover. How can we just increase water retention and then also create these microclimates that the plants are more adapted to? And I guess the last thing I just want to say is, like, I'm sure there are people out there saying, like, why don't you just do like Maud and up and move to a more watery place, But this is the place I grew up. I live in a food desert. I also have extremely deep ties to the community. I think everybody deserves to have good food. I want to live here and I'm willing to figure it out. And I don't want to sound like a whiner. I think plenty of civilizations, the Pueblo, like all kinds of people and over, the history of humanity have figured out how to do this in hot climates and dry climates. And we're all going to have to. And I guess part of it too is like Katie and I, we send each other a text every year in probably like May that says, stop looking at Instagram because that's not where you live. You don't live there. You're not a bad farmer. And it takes a lot of like encouraging each other that we're not just bad at our jobs because of the conditions that we have to face. One other thing I would just say that really can be difficult because of our climate is we can really only pick between 7 and 10 a.m. or, however early you're willing to wake up, because it just gets so hot that it's really difficult to have something that's sellable that you can really do good post-harvest handling on and have a high quality product if you don't get it picked very, very early. And so we feel like we have this really compressed time each day of what we can do when, and that can often create a lot of issues. This year was the first time I had a lot of help because I was part of this youth employment program, and I was like, whoa, I love this. I love having 5 teens here where we just get everything done, picked by 10, and then start processing after that, because I can just take like a much higher quality product to market, and it's just that's never been the situation before. So I do a lot of headlamp picking, when it cools off.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to pick it cool than to, cool it down. Do you think that there are parts of your research that will be relevant to people who aren't in the high desert?
Yeah, I think 2 things are important for other growers. It's just one is any climate, just as Maud experienced on her farm, any climate can shift. And having some more information about what to do if that happens for you where you live and you get into a drier, hotter, less humid situation, I think that could help. But the other thing is because my background is in water science and research, and my mom is a retired ecologist, like science is super important to me, and I'm very influenced by holistic management. And these are all things that really encourage monitoring to do good decision making. And I think that I want to make these tools that we're using less scary to folks, and not just technically, but also money wise. Just help folks understand that there's some really cool systems that are coming out that can really help us make better decisions, especially in those hardest parts of the year when you have decision fatigue. And I'm really excited to work with the Orisha system, which I really recommend the 2 podcasts that you did, Andrew, with Orisha folks. So Orisha is a automated system for rolling and unrolling the sides of your hoop houses, but also it can turn on fans, it can turn on water, it can do all this really neat stuff and make decisions based on your growth stage and that sort of thing. And I have found them to be really useful, save a lot of time. And I'm excited to try using more of the humidity and temperature sensors with them, because it's a continuous download of data and we can watch it change over the day. And we're going to have some help from actually a couple of PhD students that I know from the University of Hawaii, which doesn't sound like a dry place to farm, but actually there are a lot of dry places in Hawaii. And so Sarah Binimana, who is a former intern of mine, and her colleague Jacob Hurst are going to be helping us work through our data and kind of make sense of what we are seeing or not seeing. And so I guess I would just like to be able to provide more information to growers about what is the real relationship between humidity and growth and temperature with salad production. And, are we really able to see a significant impact from some of these treatments that we're doing, overhead watering and row cover and that sort of thing? I think that could help in all sorts of climates. But I mean, my heart is closest to the hardscrabble high desert growers.
Yeah. Well, that's what I would think, is that you're still going to generate information that's going to be valuable to growers who aren't in as extreme of an environment as you are, just because people outside of the high desert environment use the kind of techniques that you're trialing, and weather's just getting so weird. For example, this year has been the driest year in the 15 years we've been in Maine. Like where I am in central Maine right now, we're in severe drought conditions. And I think it'll be nice for people who maybe don't have those conditions all the time, but experience them from time to time and unpredictably. I got to say, I mean, that's one thing about climate change, is that, so like probably a decade ago, I imagined climate change as just like, well, things will gradually get warmer. And now I've realized our weather is just unpredictable now, right? Like, I don't know if this is the driest year ever in central Maine, but it's certainly the driest year in the 15 years that I've been here. But the season before last was the wettest year that we've been here, right? So we're just having these, it's just very hard to plan when your weather is unpredictable, as anybody in the audience who's farming will know. And so I could see us, like, if we have another year like this, like, I'll go look up if we have another super dry year, I'll go, hopefully you'll write an article about it for us. I'll go read the article in GFM. But if not, I know that there'll be SARE research out there. So if we get into that point, like this season where it's very dry and no precipitation in the forecast, be like, well, let's go see how did Nella Mae deal with that? So, okay, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking that there's probably applications here. Like learning about this stuff is going to inform everybody, whether they're in the high desert or not. So I'm glad you're doing this project.
Yeah. And I mean, I've learned lots of things from all you Mainers. So maybe it's my turn,
Yeah. Okay. So I know part of this is you're starting, right? Is this network the Western Arid Grower Network? Assuming the acronym is WAGN. Mm-hmm. It's a nice acronym.
Thanks.
So can you tell us a bit about that as far as the inspiration, goals, and how is WAGN going to work?
So Katie and I got a lot out of our original SARE project of just being able to have some dedicated time to talk to other growers in our climate. And I think that, one, it's fun because there are people in my life who don't want to talk about plants all the time. You got to have your plant people. It's important to have, agriculture can be kind of lonely. And especially if you're in a weird climate and there aren't a lot of growers that do what you do around you, which is the case I'm in. it's really important to have a network of people, which is why, I call Katie, who's a literally 8-hour drive away from me in the same state, to be like, what do I do with these turnips? What's happening? Whatever. So that part's really important. But I also just think, I know that there are lots and lots of growers throughout the western part of the US and in other parts of the US that are dry and arid and semi-arid that have a lot of tips and tricks to share and who want to share what they've figured out. And I just don't think we have a good place to do that now. So the idea with Western Arid Grower Network is that we'll do 3 meetings a year in the winter. We'll have speakers that are speaking specifically about the issues that we face. And, it's research based, but also like on farm experience based. And we will just provide a very informal space for folks to learn more about the information, knowledge, expertise that's out there about how to do what we're doing, and just help people connect and get better at what they're doing and hopefully feel less alone. So I'm really excited about it. We're going to start this December. We're going to meet the second Monday of the month for December, January, February. The 2 PhD students I mentioned from the University of Hawaii, Sarah Benyamana and Jacob Hurst, are going to be 2 of the speakers. We're going to focus on the specific challenges we face with direct seeding and transplant success, but also dealing with these extreme temperatures and keeping plants going in the hottest parts of the year. And then I want to invite anyone to join. We're going to, in the next month or so throughout the month of November, we'll be having registration open for joining. It's all free. We want folks to join who want to learn more about how to do better in their climate and talk to folks who have a lot of expertise, not just as researchers at universities, but also just in the field.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay, so you said people can't register yet, but do you have a website or something, or how are people going to find that?
aridgrowers.org is the website. It's in its infancy and it will be ready by the 1st of November.
Okay. We can do a reminder. Now, all right, Nella Mae, you remind me when you're up and running, and if you want, okay, we could do like a social media post through the GFM socials and just say wagon's rolling.
Yeah. That's great.
Okay.
So we will be making sure to send out information about the WAGN meetings, Western Arid Grower meetings, through extension in the Western states, through SARE. GFM has said that they would help us get the word out. The website will be up and running, aridgrowers.org. And I will be doing a lot on my own social media, which is just Nella Mae's Farm everywhere, to get the word out. And we want to make it real open to folks to discuss these fun and exciting challenges of arid and semi-arid growing.
Yeah, I think growers are going to appreciate the importance of regional knowledge because, like we said, that's the thing about local agriculture, is that you have to have solutions for all different climates. And I'm glad you're doing it, because I think farmers are the most innovative people in farming, right? You're like, it's almost like farming is just solving problems. I mean, I guess that's life too, but it's like what happens when the weather changes or something breaks and you have to come up with a backup solution. So I'm so glad that you're sharing it, because the obviously there are a certain set of considerations that you're dealing with that, say, people up here in the Northeast where I am are not. But that's also why we try to get a variety of articles from a variety of locations for Growing for Market in the podcast, because we know it's different, and that it's frustrating to have to reinvent the wheel. Like, we know we're out here dealing with things on our farms that other people probably have already dealt with, and so it's so much more efficient to be able to learn from our fellow farmers than just like go out and reinvent that wheel. So I'm so glad you're doing the project and sharing about it.
Exactly. And I mean, I think that's obviously the big mission of Growing for Market, but Katie and I aren't experts. We know what we know from the farms that we're on. We just see that there's a need for growers to get together and to swap stories and information, and to have researchers attend to their challenges. And so we're not doing this to be like, well, you know everything. We're just doing this to try and create this a collaboration with other growers. And as you said, how many times have I been in the field going, I know somebody knows how to fix this or a better way of doing this, but I don't know who that person is. And I really wish I did. So just trying to keep each other from, like you said, recreating the wheel every season or with every new challenge is a big part of it. And being collaborative and having fun and having farmer friends.
Increase the viability and profitability of the farmers around you. So that's great. Those are the questions that I had prepared for you. Is there anything else I should have asked you or that you'd like to say before we let you go?
I mean, I guess I just want to make a plug for these farmer networks that in my work over the years, I more and more see myself as a convener than necessarily like, the concept of extension is extending the university from the knowledge out to rural communities. But really now it's really about facilitation and convening, because as you said, farmers know the most about farming. And so I'm really excited to work with Nella Mae and Katie on helping to develop this network. And I hope listeners will partake if they're interested and it's relevant to them.
Yeah, it's a great project. We're really happy to help promote, here at GFM. So let us know if there's ways we can help you promote WAGN and the research that you're doing.
Yep. And just a big thanks to you, Andrew, and also to Maud. As a kid who grew up in 4-H, I have an undying love for extension. And she's just been so helpful to a lot of growers, including myself and Katie. So we're looking forward to doing this work again with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Maud. And yes, there's a lot of great work done by extension agents all over the country. So thank you. Thank you for that. How can people find you online or social media or wherever you want people to look you up?
Okay, aridgrowers.org. And as I said, my farm is Nella Mae's Farm. That's NELLAMAESFARM on all the socials. My email address is also farmer@nellamaesfarm.com. So I'm happy to field questions. We will be doing our best to get all of this information out to all the Western Extension services as well as Western SARE. So yeah.
Great. Well, it's a really exciting project. I'm glad you're doing it. Thank you for sharing with the audience. I'm sure they'll be interested. And good luck with it. I can't wait to hear, maybe we talk again or you want to write a GFM article or something.
Definitely.
I can't wait to hear how it all turns out.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Thank you both so much for the time. Really appreciate it. And happy growing. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never even get billed. All subscriptions get you a year of the magazine, plus 150 downloadable back issues from the last 15 years and over 1,700 archived articles. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 a year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.